Hi everyone. I think let's get started. Sorry for the brief delay, but hold on. Great, thank you. Okay, yes, thank you everyone so much for coming. I'm so thrilled to present our She Can, We Can event for our lead-off event for psychology for this academic year. This theme for today is Women Navigating 21st Century Academia. And I'm so thrilled to have speakers from lots of different disciplinary backgrounds to talk about successes, challenges, all the good and the bad of experiences in academia. I'm really excited to be hosting this event today on behalf of the Diversity Club and the Psychology Department and the entire She Can, We Can event series. Just to preview some of the things we'll be talking about today. Last year, this really terrific but also slightly depressing paper came out last year by Gruber and colleagues, looking at disparities in just within the field of psychology in terms of advancements for women in a variety of different domains. So they talked about things like career advancement, financial compensation, service, a variety of different kinds of biases that are that can be barriers for women advancing, even in a field like psychology, where we see a lot more equity in terms of representation than certainly many other fields in academia. So seeing this description of my own field as a psychologist was very disconcerting and highlighted many areas where we can still make progress, both for women and in general for underrepresented people from lots of different kinds of backgrounds. So just without any further ado, I want to introduce our speakers for today. We have Mirja Holman, Associate Professor of Political Science from Tulane University, Aileen Reed, Assistant Professor in the Department of Education Research and Methodology here at the School of Education at UNCG, and Tanya Shields, the Bowman and Gordon Gray Distinguished Term Professor, an Associate Professor, Department of Women and Gender Studies at UNC Chapel Hill. So we have, as I said, folks from lots of different disciplinary backgrounds, and I'm sure from our conversations that we've had so far, we'll be hearing a lot of overlap across these different fields and also perhaps some unique challenges that individual fields present. So that's the order that we'll be going in today. And just to give you a little preview of the event structure, we'll have about 15 minutes per speaker, and then 5 minutes for questions for that speaker and the topics that they raised. And then for the remaining time, we'll have a group discussion where folks from the audience, I'll also take a peek at the YouTube comments from the live stream to raise some questions from the audience. But one question that I gave as a preview to all the speakers is something that I would like to discuss as a group is kind of one key barrier or challenge in each speaker's field and some potential solutions. So I know you may also have this in your individual talks as well, but I thought having a group discussion would be valuable here as well. Okay, so just thank you before we get started. Again, thank you so much to the UNCG Psychology Diversity Club for help in applying for and organizing this event. Steve Haynes in the Provost's office for organizing the entire series and funding it. We really appreciate it, and I'm so excited to be able to present our speakers today. So I think that's enough from me. First, I'd like to welcome Mirja Holman to talk about the field of political science.
You're good. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to Jasmine for inviting me here. I'm excited to be here. This event has been scheduled for a long time, and so it's very lovely to be in a room with people talking about this and not just virtually. So I'm very excited to be here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I think are important as strategies for survival in academia. And as I do it, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why we need strategies for survival in academia, in particular, the way that academia is constructed as a space built for primarily white men. And if we don't fit those criteria, and if we have different ideas about how power should be structured, then in many ways the system is built to try to reject us and push us out. And so if we're trying to survive and potentially even thrive within an environment like that, then it's important for us to try to think about the things that do and potentially don't matter. So we're going to start with the big one, which is you should probably ignore everything that everybody says today if it doesn't work for you. So one of my sort of things that I think about a lot is that all advice is bad advice for somebody. All advice might be good advice for somebody else. So as you're thinking about this, keep in mind that we have a serious problem with anybody in this group giving advice because we're selecting on the dependent variable, right? We've been successful in that we have gotten jobs in academia, and we have published work, and we've gotten funding and all of these things. And so our advice is good advice for us and from us, but maybe not necessarily for everybody else. And my advice is built on me being a white woman that came from a working class background, but has a lot of connections to people in academia and understands the system and got a lot of advice about insider knowledge. So the first big thing is that I'd say, as we think about sort of how we navigate a system that is not necessarily built for us, the first big piece of advice that I say is please don't shrink yourself. That often we're given the feedback or we're taught that if we're just nice enough, if we're just polite enough, if we are just small enough, if we are just that perfect combination of what other people think that we should be, then we're going to be accepted into a system that was not built for us. But that's a lie, because the reality is that the system is not built for us, and so the system is always going to find a way to try to push us out and make us feel like we don't belong. So even as we shrink ourselves over and over again, the system is going to say like, oh, well, you didn't do that in the right way, though. You did it too much. You were too nice. You were too small. We didn't even know you were there because you were so small. So the first sort of big thing that I'd say is no matter what, other people are going to find some issue with who you are and how you behave. So be authentic to yourself, however you want that to be. So if you want to be nice, that's fine, be nice. If you want to bake cookies, but never feel like you have to occupy those roles. And instead think about what it means for you to be an authentic person and happy with yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be you alone in a room over and over again forever. And you have to be comfortable with that person. So don't shrink yourself as you think about strategies for success in academia. The second big do is to find your coven, right? So find the group of people, the group of witches that are going to have your back. And in doing this, it's really important to think about the ways that as you succeed, you offer new opportunities for others to succeed. So I often like to think about it as you don't necessarily just have a circle of people that help you, but instead make that circle into a horseshoe, right? Always have an opening that allows new people to come in, and then you can all lift together. And this is one of these places where I think it's really important to think about the weight of individual expectations for success in a system that is not built for our success. We're all, if we fight as individuals, going to have a really hard time succeeding. But if we instead band together in groups, then we are far stronger and we have lots more opportunities for success and to help us recover from failure rather than just every person going alone. So I really would encourage people as they're thinking about sort of how to navigate academia to find your people, find that group of individuals, and then start to think about their successes as your successes and their failures as your failures. And that collective view then offers you far more strength than if you're just pushing up against by yourself all of these rules and expectations. The second don't is please don't limit your ambition. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is women's political ambition and girls' political ambition. We know that women and girls are much less likely to be interested in and express lots of ambition for their lives and to be interested in politics. And one of the reasons for this is a lot of internal self-doubt, that we hold ourselves to higher expectations. We see the world as not representing us, and so then we don't have ambition to go out into the world. And that is an incredibly rational response. That is totally acceptable for people to not always want to challenge the system. But I really encourage you to think about the ways that you may discount your own ambition because you think that for some reason somebody is going to judge you harshly, or for some reason you are not going to be able to, you're going to fail as you do this. But the reality is that we all fail all the time, every day. If you are interested in an academic career, your life is going to be filled with failure. The core essence of science is failing all the time. And getting it wrong until we figure out how to get it right. And so think about the ways that you might be limiting your own self because of this, and push yourself forward to have ambition, whatever that ambition might be. I would also say my third do is to spend some time thinking about how to sabotage and challenge the system. We won't see really fundamental changes until we change these institutions and the institutional structures. Women are often taught to be sort of these good girls that are not going to sabotage the system. We're just going to operate by the rules. The rules are applied to us, right? We have to follow them. But I'd say that there is an enormous amount of freedom and the possibility for change in thinking very strategically about which rules we actually have to follow. Which are the important rules? Which are the not important rules? Which are the rules that were created just to keep us in a particular place? And how can we sabotage those rules? How can we change those systems? So this is everything from refusing to do labor that is thrust upon you to speaking up in environments where you're not supposed to talk, to being the person that says we don't have to do it this way, to saying no, I don't think that person should get an award because he is a racist or sexist jerk, right? So thinking about the ways that we can change the systems that exist, and in doing so, not just make the world better for ourselves, but also for the additional people that will come after us. And this relates to the final sort of don't, which is please don't wait for somebody else to do it, because what's going to end up happening is it's going to be probably somebody with less power and fewer resources that ends up having to do it because you put it aside. And I would say this particularly as a white woman, that if I often choose not to challenge something or allow for an unfair system to continue, it means that my Black colleagues, particularly my colleagues that are women of color, are going to have to deal with this on a higher scale. And they're going to be the ones that end up being ultimately punished by the system and pushing back against it. And then everybody's going to say like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so she's very prickly. She's not very nice. She's very aggressive. And that's because the full weight of the system has rested on her because I allowed it to continue on beyond me. So we have a responsibility not to just ourselves and thinking about how to change systems to make them better for ourselves, but also this responsibility that if we don't do it, then if we allow ourselves to be protected by whatever privilege we have, then it falls further and further on those that have less and less privilege. So thinking about the ways that we can reshape the world, not just for ourselves, but for others. And then finally, I would just say, please be the change that you want to see in the world, that if you want to see something, just go and do it and don't ask permission to do it, just do it. The patriarchy depends on your apathy. So it depends on you being disheartened and disengaged and unwilling to make changes. So those are my big lessons for how to survive and thrive in academia. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Any questions from the group here? I also have the YouTube stream up, so if anyone on YouTube wants to post a question in the chat, I will really appreciate it.
What that means for you on the ground in your day-to-day. I mean, I understand that the abstract, but when you actually have to do that, what does it look like?
Yeah. Do you want to repeat this? Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So the question is, what does it actually mean on the ground to, as a responsibility to make things better? This is a great question. From my perspective, and this, I'll give some very academic examples of this. There are a lot of opportunities where in my academic life where I can say, because I'm a tenured person that has a fair degree of latitude because I'm research productive, I can say no to things. It's actually pretty easy for me to say no to things. But each no for me is an opportunity to I could just say no, which that's sometimes okay. But I can also think, as saying no, who is going to have to say yes to this? And if I say no to something like sitting on a search committee that is going to determine who we hire in our department, is that going to mean then that somebody that doesn't care about racial, ethnic, gender diversity sits on that committee, and thus those are not parts of the discussion of who we're going to hire? Or is it going to mean that somebody that has similar attitudes to me is on that committee, right? So thinking about that, right? So do I make a decision to spend my time on something because I think that it will be impactful in terms of the types of discussions that are had? Or if I say no to sitting on like a DEI committee, for example, does that then mean that the one woman of color in my department is going to have to end up sitting on yet another DEI committee that does nothing? And so my choice there would be not just to say no, but to also think about suggesting alternative replacements for myself to ensure that the burden of that service doesn't then rest fully on somebody that already is overwhelmed with this type of service. So those are, thinking about the ways that I have privilege to say no, but what does that no, there are sometimes a no is just a no and they go find somebody else and it doesn't matter. But sometimes a no means it's going to have ripples out for other people. And I want to make sure that my no then doesn't end up burdening somebody that doesn't have the privilege of being able to say no. Does that make sense? Yeah.
There's not really questions in the audience. I have a question. So I got to know you a little bit through Twitter and through your newsletter, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the point at which you felt comfortable just fully being yourself in those spaces and what that has meant both for you in your career and personally, and how to get comfortable, like you were talking about, like, comfortable feeling your authentic self. How do you get there?
That's a good question. So I've never like been all that great at being quiet. Like since day one, probably my parents would be like, yeah, no, she's never been quiet. So it was a struggle when I was, I got a lot of people get the advice, and I think particularly women get the advice that when you start a tenure track job, just like be quiet, don't draw attention to yourself, just keep your head down and do your work and smile a lot. And then once you get tenure, you get to be free. But like that's a bunch of BS, right? Because if you don't say anything before you get tenure, you're not going to say anything after you get tenure either. So a few of the things that sort of made me maybe be a little bit more free online were that I got really, really mad about a couple of things, like just absolutely enraged about a couple of major events about sexual harassment within political science. And I like just rage tweeted about it, and then ended up like being carried in the news about it. And I was like, well, I guess this is just like cats out of the bag, so I can just kind of say whatever I want from now on. But then I also realized, like, if I'm going to get in professional trouble for being honest on social media, then I don't want this job. Like that's not the job that I want if I'm going to. So part of it was I just like got so mad that I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And then part of it was I just realized that I don't want to be somebody that's not authentic in sort of all of my presentation. I do delete my tweets though, so,
Okay, well, thank you so much. And then move on to Aileen, and we'll circle back to many of these topics in our group.
Perfect. Thank you all.
I don't know. Okay. Just one minute.
Oh, all right. Hello, everyone. So I am local here at UNCG. I'm an assistant professor in the Educational Research Methodology Department, as well as a co-PI on the Spartans Advance. And so I count it a privilege to be able to speak to you today. One, because I'll share out of both my own experiences and what the research has said, but also from that intersectionality of both being a woman and a woman of color. I work with a lot of STEM faculty, and so my stories or my examples will definitely come out of there. And so I want to make mention of Spartans Advance because it really aims to increase participation of women and minoritized groups in STEM careers. And part of what I do professionally is I lead evaluation projects for that funded by the National Science Foundation. So a lot of my work is rooted in working with STEM faculty on a regular basis. I am an educational researcher as well, and so I have experiences in both working with STEM faculty as well as in my own domain and as an evaluator. And so today I really want to talk about three things that for me are some of the most salient issues and challenges that I've observed both in my work and my collaborations with others. And so the first one is institutional climate and culture. And I'm just going to talk basically challenges and strategies for success, because otherwise I will be up here for an hour. Okay, so what I want to say is, I also want to say that I started here as a doctoral student. When I graduated, I became a visiting assistant professor, moved to a clinical assistant professor, and then this year I'm starting as a tenure track assistant professor. So that's all context as well. And it gives a sense of I'm newer than my colleagues, and so some of my experiences and some of my examples will also come from there. And so institutional climate and culture. And I want to say that It's a given. We will evolve and grow as scholars and individuals over time. But we really do want to be attentive to the culture of the institution as well as the department that we're going into, regardless of whatever career, other stage of your career you're at, especially if you transition. And so what some of the challenges, things to think about, things to look at, things that I've seen and observed. What are the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and perceptions of our members of the institution? And so this is, well, we say we are this is what we espouse, but what are we really in practice, right? And so you're looking at things like, can you grow and thrive there? Will this become a place where you're stifled, right? Or are you always questioning yourself? If this is an environment, like Myria said, don't shrink yourself, but you get there on day one and it's like, all the energy is sucked out of you. And so those are things to think about. Inequities, right? Gender, ethnic, racial, pay, all of these things, right? Because when you're thinking about the institution, you really want to say, well, how do they ensure that differently situated groups receive the different kinds of supports and resources that they need in order to thrive and be successful? Also, there's the pressure to perform. We've heard about that. We know, we hear it all the time in academia, imposter syndrome, research productivity. And often that's dealt with, you have to consider, well, what type of institution will suit me best? Am I going to go to an R1 where it's research intensive, or I'm going to go to a teaching intensive? So that all has to do with your focus and your desires. And so with the pressure to perform also comes the pressure to conform. And this is an area for STEM faculty, as well as myself as a woman of color or Black faculty. Often the research says that, we as Black faculty, this is not anecdotal, but we're interested in the issues that concern us, that concern our community. And sometimes that is not well regarded. Our scholarship is not deemed serious enough or exceptional enough. And so if that's the climate or the culture of that institution, those are things that we really have to be attentive to. What supports are there for retention and advancement? This is something that we look at in terms of advance, in terms of STEM faculty, but this is across the board for any discipline. Existence of policies, lack of awareness, and lack of access to these policies. So these are some of the challenges that I see for women as we enter the academy and continue to persist in the academy. And then there's a satisfaction and sense of belonging. If there's a lot of attrition or transition, or people are leaving that institution or that department, that's a red flag and something to look at and to think about. And so some strategies for success as we think about institutional climate and culture, and of course this is not exhaustive, we have a short amount of time, but advocate for change. Myria just said, let your voice be heard, right? Address those climate issues. Don't wait until you're an associate professor. If you are unhappy or dissatisfied, if you have agency to say something, do something, particularly if it has to do with EDI kinds of things, biases, prejudice in your environment. Seek out a diversity of mentors, people at different stages in different disciplines to help you as a woman to succeed, because we are not a one type fit all, and we have people around us who can speak into the different aspects and challenges. Do your research prior to the job search, and this is for students as well, right? Faculty, students. I was part of the Preparing Future Faculty program here at UNCG, and that was really helpful for me to think about, well, what kind of institution do I want? What are my interests? What makes sense for me, okay? Collaboration is another big thing that I've seen, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but particularly in the STEM fields, I work with two amazing groups of people who are leading $10 million projects, and they are led by women, female faculty. That's not normal in the STEM fields. And so, but they found a way to collaborate and make it happen, right? And so your climate may be anti-collaboration, but that's a strategy to say, well, if that is what's increasing my productivity, if that's what's helping me to get funded, but if that's who I am, right, my value system, all of that matters. And so strategies to consider, ongoing professional development, and then examine those areas where there's personal misfit. Right, we want to be the change that we want to see. And then we want to just make sure that we take chances. We want to innovate. That's the great thing about academia. You don't want to be recycling the whole everything. You're not successful if you just keep recycling others' work, but you're being innovative and you're standing out. Another area that I want to talk to you about is the unseen burden of mentoring and service. This has already been mentioned, but it's an area particularly for women of color and for women. Challenges, because it increases that time to get to full professor rank, and in many cases, probably not at all. Women get stalled at the associate professor level. We work hard to get tenure, and then we get stuck. Okay, I've seen it. My colleagues talk about it, and so that's one of the challenges. There are women and faculty of color hold disproportionate amount of non-tenure track positions, and so a lot of the labor and the heavy lifting falls upon them. And some of this has to do with our concern for students' well-being and resources. It's not that men are not concerned, but women, the nurturers that we are, our innate sense of caring for others takes hold. And I work with faculty, STEM faculty, where I'm going to talk about it at the end or later, but mental health, that takes an emotional toll on us as women, okay? And so that's something to consider. Another is the bias review processes. And so just some of the challenges that we see. So strategies for success. Again, advocate for change, right? We have a voice. And so how can we let our voices be heard? One thing I would suggest is negotiate advising and service commitments, especially if they're not part of your formal evaluation. So like I said, if we as women are holding a lot of those non-tenure track positions or are in positions where we have the heavier load or we have that emotional draw, well, maybe there's some negotiation so that we can have that balance. So something for you, if you're on the job market and you're considering that, maybe I don't get any advisees until year 2, right? Till I can get settled and those kinds of things. Document your experiences, journal, write about it, tweet, share with others, but it's a way to process and to build community to help to make sure that we are advancing and that we're moving ahead. And then establishing healthy boundaries. And I'm trying to give you practical tips as well, right? Limit the number of advising meetings per week. I have been really doing that this year. Like, okay, my calendar, I could only do 2 of these a week, depending on the students or depending on what else is going on, right? Time limits for meeting. Maybe we're only meeting for 30 minutes, right? As opposed to 2 hours in my office. Again, it's about my personal productivity, but it's also about managing and controlling how much I'm giving out so that I can continue to give out and continue to support students and be helpful to other colleagues. A thing that's always in my mind, if you've ever heard of the urgent versus important matrix, that's something really to do. And how I put this in practice for me, I love that function in email that says, keep as mark as unread. So I will read it. And if it's urgent, I'll deal with it. And if it's not, so that I don't forget about it, I leave it marked as unread so that I can go back to it, right? But that's just little practical things for us to consider. And then finally, the last piece is work-life balance. COVID-19 has exacerbated the disparities. It has amplified, brought to life a lot of the issues, the disparities between men and women in academia, and the intersectionality with race and ethnicity. And so this is something that is brought to life. That's why we're having some of these conversations now. But also, you know, it has really impacted productivity. And the disparities really have shed light on the heavy load that women carry and bear, not just in academia, but in general. Some of the challenges, right? One article in like the Chronicle talked about the fact that, during the pandemic, men have submitted up to 50% more papers than they normally would. And women are like, shoo, well, men are like, whoo, that's not good. That is not a good metric for us. And so publications, presentations, grant submissions, we've heard about this where men tend to get higher funding than women, or we tend to not to go after the top dollar. All of this even touches some of what Miria said in terms of, shrinking back and limiting ourselves. We have the same opportunities, and so we have to definitely pursue them. Health concerns that I've talked about. Mental health is a real thing in academia. My colleagues, I meet regularly with colleagues that are talking about this, who are in counseling. It's a real thing. We don't talk about it, and I see it. I see it with the projects that I work with, and I'm always saying, okay, well, you guys are doing great. You're functioning well. Okay, what are you doing for self-care? What are you doing to avoid burnout? Okay, and so some strategies for success. Center your family life within your work expectations. Set boundaries around teaching and other critical duties. And build community that will support you emotionally, socially, depend on your faith, depend on family, whoever is your community, lean into that community, because this is taxing work, it's emotional work, but in order to succeed and advance, we need that community around us cheering us on. And finally, just practice self-care. I think that's a critical piece of it in terms of that work-life balance. So I'm going to stop there and happy to answer questions, but for those of you who are, I know this is psychology focused, check out the Advance website at advance.uncg.edu, and be familiar with the policies, be familiar with some of the issues, look at the resources that are available to you as faculty, as STEM faculty. Okay, thank you.
Questions for Amy. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk. So I advise a lot of undergraduate and graduate students and the quality of life, and female, or people of color. And I run into the issue that's kind of alluded to, that when they're planning their future, they seem to be seeking not the top school, maybe a secondary, tertiary school. And my only comment is something like, but you really can do it. You really can do it, and that doesn't seem to be enough. Are there things we can do, we can change to allow for our students to realize they have more potential than maybe they're going for?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because that was a point I wanted to make. For me personally, I was probably one of those people, those students. And what I would say is try to find micro opportunities. And I call those, maybe it's not a huge talk, but maybe it is going to represent the department. So one thing that happened to me was the school, I told you I went to the Prepare Future Faculty program, and the PFF here invited me to go to Washington, D.C. to represent UNCG, to talk about my experiences. And so more of those kinds of things. And so perhaps you may not be able to create them, but you see opportunities that come along to say, you'd be good at this. And perhaps you work with them to develop their talk or develop their presentation so that they have those opportunities to build that confidence and build their capacity so that they could see, I can do this, right? So that's just one example, but I'm sure there are others. Other questions?
I don't want to, there's not one in the audience. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what the advanced grant is for anyone who's not familiar with it, and what are some of the, if there's one particular part of the grant that you think will be especially transformative for people.
So the advanced grant is funded by the National Science Foundation to really focus on the retention, the recruitment, retention, and specifically advancement of women in STEM careers. And so here on campus, we focus on things like proposal development. We focus on work-life balance. We focus on writing and productivity and those kinds of things. And I think for here, where we've really seen agencies really focusing on mid-career faculty and thinking about how we can help them advance. And so opportunities to develop proposal. One aspect here is for work-life balance. We started to offer advancing research awards. So when a faculty member is on parental leave, they can have the support to continue their research while they're away so that they're not stalled out, because that's one thing that happens. Women, we go on parental leave, and so our research kind of just is at a standstill for that time frame. And so you have the support to keep your research going and keep your productivity up. Writing groups, all of those things I think are aspects that are offered here, but essentially many advanced institutions that have advanced or these are just strategies, best practices that really work and help to promote issues. One thing that we have talked about is implicit bias. We've looked at that in detail. Last spring, we offered a Picture a Scientist. It was a movie screening where women came together and talked about that. Not just women, but STEM faculty came together and talked about those biases, how to recognize them, how to address them. And so I think holistically, there's to say that there's one piece is to not do the work service, but it's really about how do we put all of these strategies together and you plug in where you are most in need, right? So if productivity is an issue for you, you seek out those opportunities that help to increase your productivity. If work-life balance is something that you're struggling with, well, then we have resources on the website and offer other kinds of workshops that can help in those areas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in the back.
Hi, I hear a lot about, either working in academia or working for graduate students about mental health, maintaining your mental health, maintaining workplace health. And I love that. I think that's great. I really like that. It's really important to prioritize, especially for women. But I wonder about things like, as a graduate student, you can't just say things mental health. You can't say, okay, I just had it. I need a couple days. You just can't do it. You can't do it for either. So I'm wondering about what types of things you think that you can put in place to help encourage that. And if they can just say, work on your mental health, have good work-life health, great, but it's also not practical with that.
Yeah.
Sure,
no problem. So the question was, for particularly graduate students, how do we encourage awareness and attentiveness to mental health issues? Okay, and what can we practically do? That's a shorthand. Does that capture it? And I think that's an excellent question. I was not a young graduate student. I had children in school at the time. My oldest just went to college this semester, and I still have two. The other day I was on a meeting, conference call on the phone, driving to pick up one child from school, right? And all of that is taxing. And the strategy that I have used is to take a day off on the weekends. One, I'm forced to because I'm a mama. There's nothing else I can do. But now, even as my children are older, then they were school age, elementary, middle school, and they required that attention, but now they don't as much. But I still practice that where I'm consciously aware, okay, no work is getting done today and I'm not gonna feel guilty about it. I'm gonna let myself off the hook because we really need that time to step back and refresh and process. And I think for graduate students, if you are feeling that weight and that pressure, talk to your advisors, but also talk to your fellow graduate students where go out, hang out. Maybe it's once a month you get together just to blow off that steam. Particularly when you get to dissertation time and you're solo and you're by yourself, you need that community around you. And I would say also your family and your support system. They don't especially understand the pressure, but they can be there to encourage you. And maybe you just say, I just need somebody cheering me on today. I just need someone in my corner, right? And I think a combination of all of those things and having just constant conversations to acknowledge this is how I'm feeling, because the worst part of it is not acknowledging this is how I'm feeling and getting buried away and caught up in it. And I meet, like I said, I meet with colleagues regularly, and my first question is, how are you doing? Especially if I know you're in counseling. How's it going with counseling? What are you guys talking about? And giving that space to talk. It's a writing group that we meet for, but I take that time to say, okay, let's check in and see about each other's well-being. Does that answer your question?
Well, thank you so much for those great questions. Let's jump ahead to Tanya, and then after that, we'll have some time for some discussion.
Do you have notes in here or what? Do you have notes in here or no? No. Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Jasmine, for this invitation. I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this. I was just looking at some email about when I got the first invitation, which was 2019. It sort of blows my mind that it's 2021, but we're finally here together. So thank you. And again, I want to thank my colleagues who preceded me, because I think what they've shared with you is really, the nuts and bolts of it all. That's really important information. And I think I'm going to talk about some of what they said, not all of what they said, but in slightly different ways. So there's, I think, going to be a lot of overlap in what you see or what you hear. So this is what I call my shine page. And this is something I would never have done at one point in my career. And that is sort of a list of my accomplishments. That it was something, I don't know if I would say I was making myself small, but I think my cultural background is one in which you don't brag. You just do. You just show up and do. And so for me, I would come into a space and I would do the work. But what I've learned is sometimes people don't see your work unless you do a humble brag. And so you have to get comfortable doing a humble brag. And that, people talk about it in different ways. You might hear people say, what's your elevator speech? How can you talk about your research or something in, 1 minute or less? All of those types of things. It's about how you can shine and how you get people interested in what you have to say and what you have to do. So what's listed up here are some of the things that have helped me shine. And I want to really emphasize, I think both my colleagues talked about collaboration. I feel collaboration has really been one of the guiding principles of not just my life, but my professional life. My advisor, Merle Collins at the University of Maryland, I think of her as someone who embodies what I call the ethics of collaboration. And she has always had a collaborative spirit, and that's something that I find really important and has really sustained me in this profession. So one of the collaborations, and I'll sort of talk about this out of order here, is telling our stories of home, which was an opportunity I had with Kathy Perkins, who was a professor of drama at UNC. She has since retired. And basically, Kathy read this book called, and I read it too, Help Me to Find My People by Heather Williams. And it's a history book about formerly enslaved people looking for their families. And Kathy was like, we have to do something with this book. We have to do something. And I was like, okay, what do you want to do? And basically what we did was what I call the Telling Our Stories of Home project, we did a conference, a performance series, and a festival all together, and we've also done a special issue based on this work. This work allowed us to bring women who identify as African women in some way, shape, or form from around the world. Women from India, Brazil, Rwanda, the US, the UK, all came and were part of this conference. But that could not have happened unless Kathy reached out to me and I reached back. And I think that that's an important thing as well. People will often reach out to you, but you may not recognize it as an opportunity. You'd be like, and I think, again, going to your idea about shrinking yourself, like, no, you couldn't possibly want to collaborate with me, or I'm not ready for that. And I think you have to get to a place where you're like, well, let me try. Sometimes we're not ready, but we have to try. And in trying, we'll realize that we might be ready. Another important thing for me was pipelines. So pipelines, especially, I think, as you said, playing in a system, playing a game that was not meant for us, has been a really important way to diversify the institutions of academia and our various disciplines. And the way I came to UNC was through the Carolina Diversity Postdoc. And basically, this is a postdoctoral fellowship that you get for 2 years, and you apply, you list, which department you want to be in. And I chose Women and Gender Studies, and they chose me back. And you get 2 years to sort of think about, do you want to be at Carolina? But more importantly, how can you turn your dissertation into articles or a book? And so that was what I was supposed to be doing during my 2 years. What I actually did was rested. That I came out of graduate school and I was tired. I was beat down. And I won't say beat down by my advisor, but just all the work you have to do to finish. And basically I'm a sort of curious person. I went to like every conference that was on campus and, got to know people in that way, but I wasn't necessarily productive in the way that I should have been. And I used to sort of beat myself up about this, but I think we all need, as my colleagues have said, rest. And our brains actually won't function unless we do get some rest. So I think it's important to, as you think about your trajectory and that balance between, publications or conferences, articles, whatever you need to do, but also where do you build in your breaks? Where do you build in your rest? So this is, I guess, my subtitle for this slide would be things I wish I could do well even today. And one of them, you hear the advice over and over, learning to say no. And it's really true. I know it's hard to do. And I think it's hard to do particularly if you are part of an underrepresented group, because you're often asked to represent that group in some way, shape, or form. And it's hard to say no when like if I sit on that committee, I could bring along 3-4 more people. So what do you do? I think it's important to say no. I think you have to start exercising that muscle now as junior faculty and graduate students. And however you figure out to say no, say it. So, my favorite way to say no is thank you for thinking of me, but I can't do that right now. And sometimes I'll say, if it's something I'm really passionate about, check back with me, in X number of days, months, or years. But so that there are ways you can say no. But I think learning to say no is really going to be a significant part of your careers. The other thing for me is, how do I play this game, rigged as it is? And for me, when I heard words like ambition or networking, they had negative connotations for me in my experience. And I think the first time I heard the word networking was right after college. I was working at a nonprofit, and one of the co-directors was like, yeah, we're gonna have a networking event. We're gonna schmooze with these donors. And it just felt oily and icky. and something I didn't want to do. And it's something that I used to say doesn't come naturally to me. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of networking. But what I realized is I'm uncomfortable with the way certain people engage in the world. And I realized that I actually have built these wide networks, but they're based on interests. They're not forced. So I'm not going to run up to so-and-so just because she's a star in the field if I have nothing to say to her. If we're sitting by each other at lunch and we strike up a conversation and it goes someplace, then great. So for me, it's about that organic connection. I'm sure you will get advice that says the complete opposite, but that was my experience. That was something, I wasn't comfortable doing. And what I realized, there are many other things that I'm not comfortable doing, but I have to do them to a degree to get my job done. And so what I have to ask myself is, to what degree am I comfortable with XYZ behavior? And then do something about that. The other thing that I think it's important to think about is utter, total, and complete exhaustion. And I stand before you today in that space. You were talking about the pandemic and how that has illustrated and exacerbated inequalities, particularly for people who have to provide care in their family as well as do some other type of job. And while I absolutely had support in my family, what I found was that I was in front of my computer for 12-hour days. And I think the day, I remember this, March 19th, because it was the day one of my dear friends, it was her birthday. And I was on Zoom from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. I think I had a 30-minute lunch break. And that day, I felt that my eyeballs were bleeding. And that day, I said, you know what? I cannot do this anymore. I just cannot. Because it was not only the meetings, but I was reading on the screen. So I had horrible eye strain. And so that was a wake-up call for me, that I simply cannot function in this way. It's not sustainable. So I started to say no. That helped me say no. Like, when you come to the place where you depend on your eyes to do your job and your eyes aren't functioning, it's a hard stop. And so I think thinking through, you don't want to get to that point where your body starts failing on you. But before you get to that point, think about what sort of interventions can you make. I'm at a stage in life right now, where they call it the change of life. And this change of life means that I don't sleep the way I once slept. So, yesterday, for instance, I was up at 1:30 in the morning and I couldn't get back to sleep. So my day started at 1:30 in the morning yesterday and ended about 9. Today, I had a nicer day where I woke up at 3 in the morning instead of 1:30 in the morning. And so I've had to say to myself, well, okay, what do you do with this time? Because try as hard as you want to, you're not falling back to sleep. So I now use it as pockets of work. And then I rest really well come 5 a.m. in the morning, unless I have to, go teach or come see you all. But I think, again, it's thinking about, I think you had asked the question about, well, how do you say no when you have these external responsibilities? And I think that is hard. But what I'm realizing is that I want to live beyond this job. I don't want to die in this job. And I've seen people die in this job. So I think that has helped me recalibrate and think about how I'm moving through the space. The other thing I would say that I wish I was better at to this day is making the ask. I think both of you talked about the idea of negotiation, and women don't ask. This is an old version of my PowerPoint. The updated version had some slides from the AAUP that talked about the salary inequities between men and women in academia. And that even though we have more and more women in academia, they're still paid less. And in fact, at my institution, in women's and gender studies, my PhD is in comparative literature. if I started my career in the comparative literature department at UNC, I would have started with at least $10,000 more than I started with in women's and gender studies at the same university. But women's and gender studies at my university is seen as, they're like, well, it's not a highly paid discipline. This is what a senior associate dean told me. And I remember we had an external review, and one of our reviewers, I think, was from Kansas or Kentucky or someplace like that. And they came in and they were appalled at our salaries. So I'm like, you live in Kansas and what I make offends you? Okay, like I knew it was offensive, but this is real offensive. But anyway, I think in that process of trying to negotiate, you have to figure out how to make the ask. And I think that's been an uncomfortable place for many women. And this book, Ask for It, which was recommended to me by a friend, I really like because it is about giving you small things to do so you get comfortable asking, to then you work that muscle, so then you work up to asking for the big thing so it doesn't feel as uncomfortable. And so that's the book I would highly recommend. In terms of how you change, I think you talked about it as the climate and what you do. One of the things that I would say, again, if I was thinking about my, real title for this slide, it would be Help Us Establish. And one of the people, I have been really, really blessed to have colleagues who I think they make, given everything that happens at Chapel Hill, which I'm sure many of you are quite aware of, they have made Chapel Hill a really wonderful place for me. And one of my colleagues who has since left, Kia Caldwell, spearheaded and created the Roadmap for Racial Equity, which is a great document in terms of thinking about what you advocate for, how you build alliances and coalitions. But Kia was also someone who recommended that I do leadership training. And that was one thing from the first slide that I didn't talk about. There's a program at UNC called the Academic Leadership Program. And actually, as part of it, you come to Greensboro to the Center for Creative Leadership for a week. And Kia said, Tanya, I think you should apply for this. And I said, I'm not sure I'm interested in leadership. I'm not. She's like, that's okay, try it out. And I went, I read about it. I was like, yeah, let me go see. And what I loved about this program is that it was leadership, it was you as a leader. So it wasn't about reading budgets or, that sort of, daily crunching that you might have to do in various leadership positions, which that's important to know and understand. But it was about who would I be as a leader? What are the things that animate me? What are the things that make me want to go out and do more? And what are my boundaries? And I think that is also a really important lesson, is understanding your own boundaries. Because there's some things I'm not interested in doing at all. And knowing that and having clarity around that means I'm much more efficient with my time. The other thing I think in thinking about diversity and inclusion in university spaces, what I put on this slide are just things to think about. Cluster hiring. I've had graduate students say to me, this small college in this small town, in this small state, really, I think I can make a difference there because they're close to a Black community or they're close to an Indigenous community, and I really want to serve that community, but I'm concerned that I won't have community. And I've said, of course you have to do what's best for you. But at that point, if you are really serious and if the institution's really serious about you, you might be able to negotiate a cluster hire. You might say, I would love to be here if there were a couple other people with me so we could build community. Because what I say to those students is students leave in roughly 4 years, but you're still at the institution. So it has to be a livable space for you. So you have to think about that when you're looking to get a job. And I think there are people who are like, I'll go there for 5 years and then I'll leave. And some people do have that opportunity, but it's not a reality for some people. So you have to be mindful about that. But these are some other things to think about. And I'll resend this PowerPoint to you so that you all can access the links if you are interested. But other things to think about: mentoring and sponsoring. You know, you talked about various types of mentorship. Carrie Ann Rockamore, who runs the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, has just great resources around these things. And what I love about Rockamore's work, she talks about never depend on one mentor, that you need a network of mentors. And what I have found is formal mentoring has rarely been effective for me. Again, it's organic mentoring where I just sort of bump into people and we have coffee, and next thing I know, they're telling me, oh, did you know to do this, or try and do that. And so that has worked very well for me. The other thing that's been almost more critical than mentorship for me has been sponsorship. And the way Rockamore defines that is that when you're not in the room, but somebody's advocating on your behalf. And I have had sponsors that I didn't even know I had. So I would get into committee meetings, people I've never met before, and they'd be like, oh, so you're Tanya Shields. And I'm like, yes, indeed I am. You know, and they're like, oh, I've heard such great things about you. You know, so-and-so told me to look out for you. And I didn't know so-and-so and I had such a deep relationship. I didn't know so-and-so was thinking about me in that particular kind of way. But that has really, I've had so many opportunities where I got in a room and something like that happened. So I really know this idea of sponsorship is a really critical idea. And here are some more resources for those of you who, you know, might want to learn more about various types of leadership opportunities and ways for inclusion and diversity in academia. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was wonderful. Any questions from the group or take a seat on YouTube? Does anyone have questions there?
Going once, going twice.
I have a
Yeah.
Well, I actually have a question for all three of you. So thank you so much for the different perspectives you brought and also your experiences and the way you approach this topic. For all three of you, I'm a big candidate about to graduate in the job market myself from this moment. And all of you have spoken about sort of little nuggets of practical information as to how to approach that process. It's a very new process, somewhat scary at the same time. And as a woman going into the field, what's the best advice you can give in that process? I keep in mind, other women keep in mind, hiring process, and then initial phase of venturing into hiring.
Can you repeat the question first, and then maybe just everyone want to kind of come up and we can transition into our discussion?
Okay, so what I think I heard you say was that you're on the job market and you're looking for any nuggets, any bits of wisdom about negotiating the job market and keeping your sanity. Okay, yeah. It's an insane process. And I think now it's even more, especially in the humanities where there are not a lot of jobs currently. I know that a lot of students feel pressure, even if they're not ready, to start the application process because they're like, I'm not sure if there's going to be a job, you know, next year or 2 years from now. And you know, I also have former students who are finished, have PhDs, but they're adjuncting because, you know, the job for them hasn't come, or they're a finalist, but they're, you know, never the person chosen. And I think, you know, to some of the earlier advice that you gave, that it's important to not put your whole soul in whether you're chosen, and to have, and that's hard because you worked hard to get here. And so to think about not being chosen can be really devastating. I think one of the things they've started doing at Duke is they actually have a program for PhDs who don't want to go into academia. And so it's about exploring all your options. I think that's another thing that, I know so many students, a person whose committee I served on decided to be an adjunct instead of going to a Tony High School because he said, I feel that I deserve to be a college professor. And, I understand that being a college professor has a certain kind of cachet, but the reality is our life is also a grind. One of my colleagues said, like, our work is so flexible, we work 23 hours a day. And that's the truth. And so I think if you're tied up in this identity of being a college professor, definitely follow that dream. But I think it's sometimes dangerous if you think that's the only thing for you or the only thing you can do, because it pigeonholes you, and then you internalize that, to talk about the mental health sort of impacts of if you're not chosen, but your whole identity is riding on being chosen, it can be a challenge. But,
yeah, so do you want to trade off with everyone, whoever's speaking, kind of come up that way, so that's how folks are.
Okay. The only other thing I'll add there is I use track as an example. The world's top athletes oftentimes don't go to like a low-level meet to build up their confidence. And it's kind of like in line with the micro opportunities that I was saying. Definitely pursue that, but being on the job market can be very taxing and discouraging. And so there are times perhaps you apply to a different range of jobs. And the fact that you might get offered something that you don't necessarily want, but that can be an opportunity to, again, give you that boost you need. Like, I'm valuable, I'm worth something. My first job talk I went on, I did not get the job, but I left that job talk feeling so confident, so empowered, so like, yes, this is what I want to do. This is who I am. And wow, that was a great opportunity. So I think the point I'm making is, yes, you'll get some rejects, but look at it as an opportunity for growth and don't wallow in the fact that you were rejected. But look at it as an opportunity to refine yourself, refine your talk, refine even what you want to do, because on a job talk, you're also interviewing the institution. I know they're interviewing you, but you are interviewing them as well. And so you are coming with the lens of, is this really what I want? And you start to kind of refine, well, this is probably not the best place for me, or this is more my speed. And so all of those things are all happening at the same time. So that's what I'd say there.
Two things that I would really recommend is one, ask for help as much as possible from everybody in your life. And that includes like people that just went through this last year. People are willing to share their material, like don't reinvent the wheel, right? Like ask if you have a job you're really interested in and somebody on social media is like, we're hiring this job. Anybody have any questions? Well, email them your questions. They are willing to answer your questions. This is one of these things where people are like, well, I didn't know you were serious about me emailing questions. I'm like, yes, if you ask me questions about this job, I will tell you exactly what we're looking for, right? I will give you lots of information about it. So make sure that you're gathering as much information and not just, don't think you have to do it by yourself, right? This is a team effort, not just an individual sport. And then the other thing that I would say that echoes everything that we've talked about is install some really clear boundaries for yourself. Applying for jobs is a job, and it should not be your whole life. And so don't be working on it at 11 p.m. on Friday night. Like, set up clear boundaries of, okay, I'm going to work on job applications on Thursday in the afternoon, and at 6 p.m. I'm going to be done, and then I'm going to reward myself with something that I really like after that. And I'm going to be done with it. And I'm not going to just endlessly go through my cover letters over and over again, because guess what? Whether or not you use the right one word on your cover letter is not going to get you a job or not. That's not what's going to matter, but we feel like we can control this one thing, so we spend all of this time and obsession on it, and it really messes with our minds. So install these boundaries around, like, treat it like a job, and then go and do other things and have a life outside of it, and that helps sort of control how much you're invested in it also. Those would be my pieces of advice.
Any other questions for the group? I'm just gonna take this down. Yeah.
So I was wondering if we can actually get
Okay, great. Yeah, the question was if folks will have access to the slides later, and everyone has graciously agreed to share the slides. So I will think of a mechanism to distribute them to folks, but I will definitely do that. I have one more question that I'm gonna ask the panel their opinion on. But before I do that, I just wanted to, let me just keep it this way, I think. Okay. One more question that I wanted to share with the group, but first I have a quick survey. Anyone who's attended this event, whether it's on the web or here in person, we just have a quick little Google survey just to get some feedback about what you thought of the event in general. And then the question that I wanted to pose to the group is, I feel like you pretty much all answered the kind of main discussion question that I previewed to everybody in your talks. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and take something that I heard from each of you, which is I'd like to hear something specific that you each either said no to or asked for, and what that did for you, and kind of how you built confidence around doing that. But one specific thing that you said no to or asked for, or both.
So I very, very recently said no to serving on an NSF review panel, which is a very prestigious thing to be asked to do and helps very much. But I'm on research leave this year, and this is a really big time commitment. And I already have committed to several other big service things. So when I was thinking about this, I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity. This is something that, like, just being asked, that's great. But am I actually gonna have time to do this, do it well, and not be mad about it? And I thought, I'm gonna be mad at myself when I am spending my time doing this. I'm gonna be mad that I said yes to this, because I'm gonna have to say no to other things that are actually more important to me than right now serving on this review panel. And I bet that this opportunity is gonna come up for me again.
It will.
And it will come up hopefully at a time where I'm not on research leave and already have some things planned, or where I haven't already committed to a couple of larger service things like serving on a job search. And so I was like, okay, it's not saying no to this, it's saying, ask me again later. And at that point, maybe it will be the right time for me. But right now, for my mental health and my professional career, I have to say no to this. So that's one of the challenges often with saying no, is that we have to say no to cool things or things that are potentially good for us. But it's really important, I think, to engage in this evaluation of, is this the right time for me right now to do this thing? So that's something that I recently said no to, and I was able to say, thank you for thinking of me. But can you ask me again at another point?
And they will.
And they will. Yes, yeah.
And I wanted to say, yes, they will, because I say no to those at least once a year. But the thing I would say for me that I've recently said no to, not because I was asked, but because I purposely did not put myself in a position to be asked, is to serve on an EDI committee. One, because of the stereotype or the burden, the fact that faculty of color are always asked. So I made sure I did not volunteer, but also I wanted to change the system. I feel like that's a topic that we all should be fully invested in. And so for me to have said, oh, I'll do it, is to absolve the other faculty in my department from their responsibility to carry and share that load and that burden. So that made me feel really good just to be able to step back and not feel compelled to have to say yes. So that was one thing for me.
We're not for everyone. We're both.
Yeah, so I think like my colleagues, I said no to doing extra work. And because that's essentially what it is. I mean, we can code it as it's an honor, and sometimes it is, but it's also extra labor on top of the labor we are required to do. And so I've said no to serving on committees. I've said no to reviewing articles. I've said no to quite a bunch of things in recent months. And it's because, you know, when I was talking about the utter and complete exhaustion, is I realized I really, since the pandemic began, I have not had a break. And even when I try to have a break, because I work at UNC Chapel Hill, there is no respite in sight between the boards, the legislature, the system, that we are, we don't get a break. So, so those are quite a few things that I've said no to. What I asked for a while ago was a raise, and I didn't get it, but it was a really useful experience for me, because I was talking to someone who mentors and coaches me, and I was telling him, like, yeah, you know, I had asked for a raise in writing, and I sort of put in writing why I felt I deserved a raise. And what his advice was so useful to me. The way he described it was, what's your BATNA and what's your WATNA, or something like that. And basically, it's like, what's your ceiling and what's your floor? Like, what's the number that, you know, at this point, you're like, you've insulted me. And, you know, what's your high number that you're like, okay, if I'm offered this, it might not be what I want, but I'm okay with it. And though I didn't get the raise in that moment, I've subsequently gotten a raise. But what that helped me do in going into the meeting after having this conversation was, it gave me such clarity about what I was asking for. And I think when you have an ask of any sort, if you can have just precision and clarity about what it is you want, that makes the process so much better. Because even though, like, I went into this meeting, I made this ask, I didn't get it, you know, like you, I came out feeling great, you know, because I felt I had advocated for myself on my own terms, and I had a clarity about what was acceptable to me and for me.
Thank you so much for all of those answers. And I also just want to thank you all for not saying no when I, a complete stranger, asked you all to be part of this panel. So I just want to say how thankful I am that you're all here today and shared all this amazing wisdom and your experiences with all of us. I think maybe a lot of people who are here right now are going to be joining us for lunch. So I would say, on that note, let's end this part of our discussion, and we'll continue on with our junior folks who are going to hear more from you, and I'm really excited about that. Thank you all so much for coming and for attending our live stream and for being a part of this experience of events during this time.
Thanks for having me, Jasmine.
Thank you so much.